I want to welcome everybody to Elizabethtown City Council work session for February 25th, 2019. And if you would, please bow your head and I'll lead us in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for another Monday, another day, another week together as family, as a council, as city government. We appreciate everything that you do for us and the blessings that you bestow on us. I want to ask you for peace and blessings for some people that went through a terrible tragedy last Thursday night here in Elizabethtown. The victims' families, their friends, we ask that you be with them. We also ask for your blessings on Councilman Deneen, who's had some surgical procedures today. And from what I understand, he's doing great. And we thank you for blessing him and taking care of him. I want you to know, and I ask you that you continue to watch over us as a city, and you stay with our law enforcement who've done such a valiant job in the past few weeks on some very tough situations. Our firefighters, our public works, all of our employees, and that you keep blessing this honorable body to make the decisions that best serve you. And it's in your name that we pray. Amen. Amen. And if we would stay standing for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we're going to start with our KTC people for street safety talk. That you, Scott? Oh, here's our guard right there. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Today we have with us Mike Vaughn and Nathan Ridgway from the Transportation Cabinet to talk about installation of mini roundabouts at certain city intersections. Just a little bit of background from where us, the city, found out about these. I went to a class back in October that talked about ways to improve our roads as a local municipality. And one of the topics that Nathan talked about was mini roundabouts. I thought it was a pretty neat idea, so I brought it back to Ed and Charlie at the time to ask if I could proceed with talking with these folks about if they could meet with us, what intersections we could look at. So in December, they met with Ed, myself, Jamie was there, Don, Michael, and Jim Shaw, and we all kind of liked the idea and thought about where to put these type of intersection controls that and what best way they could serve our city. So I'm going to let Mike and Nathan talk a little bit about where we go from here, what we do. I also brought maps of some of the intersections that we might want to look at for the city. So any questions y'all have of myself or any of the folks that were in the meeting with us, and either of these guys will help us push this conversation along. Thank you.
All right, so as Scott said, we've kind of looked at some of these. The Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, every year, we analyze every intersection in the entire state. Every intersection of a public road with another public roadway. So a public roadway and a private roadway we would not analyze, but every public roadway that intersects another public roadway, we have a screening analysis that compares the number of crashes at the intersection that has been recorded by law enforcement with the number of crashes that our intersection safety prediction model, what it would predict. So if a site's having fewer crashes than the model would predict, then we consider that site as performing better than expected, and sites where there's more crashes historically than the model would predict, we say is performing poorly. And there's a magnitude with that as well. And so even more excessive crashes, we would consider that a poorer performer than one with fewer. But when Scott got in touch with us, he sent us a list of intersections, and it turns out that several that sort of they had brainstormed, when we look at just the local road intersecting another local road, just those intersections, so not state roads or whatever, just city streets and and county roads that intersect each other. We found that several of the intersections that was on his list, I'll call it ranked, but they performed poorly, so to speak, from our crash prediction model. And so that got us interested in trying to look at ways to partner to get some of these mini roundabouts out. This is a kind of a new initiative across the country where, roundabouts in general have been around, but different agencies are starting to look at smaller and smaller footprints to see if they still give the desired performance and function. And so far, other states have seen very promising results. And one of the great benefits is they're just all around cheaper. It's a little less construction cost, usually quite a bit less right-of-way cost, but they tend to pack the same benefits or close to the same benefits. So let's say you don't get 100% of the same congestion and safety benefit, but if it costs 1/3 of the price from a benefit cost point of view, that's a really good outcome. You can sometimes build 3 mini roundabouts for the price of 1, but if you're getting 50, 60, 70% of the benefit, then at the end of the day or the year, you're way ahead. And so we work in the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and even though that is a federally funded program, compared to the other federally funded programs, it's got a very small budget. $40 million sounds like a lot, but the entire federal program in Kentucky is almost $700 million. So it's a very small portion of that federal dollars that Kentucky gets. And so we're very cost conscious and budget conscious. So we're always looking for the next best way of getting a lot of bang for a few dollars. And we think mini roundabouts is one of those intersection treatments in the correct spots that could help meet those goals of improving safety while spending fewer dollars. One of the good things about roundabouts, just in general, whether it's a mini roundabout or a regular size or anything, is that they not only can improve safety, but they tend to work better from a congestion point of view or a capacity point of view, because you don't ever stop anybody unless someone's already in the roundabout. So the overall delay at the intersection is generally relatively minor, assuming you don't put them in a bad spot. Obviously, we're not going to put a roundabout at the intersection of like the bypass and another high travel lane. It's too much traffic, it can't handle it. But so we did sort of foresee that mini roundabouts could be useful in cities and neighborhoods and local communities where the traffic volumes would never be expected to grow just enormously big. And
For the speed limit too.
oh yeah,
Because we have 55-mile-an-hour speed limits. These are better suited for lower speed limits.
that's right, yeah. And so I'll recap some of the additional benefits because we were talking about that on the way down. I already mentioned that generally right-of-way is a lot smaller footprint. So some states have been able to implement the mini roundabout without needing any right-of-way. They sometimes need to get construction easements for the side slopes and things, but the overall footprint of the final roadway generally can be implemented within existing right-of-way. So that cuts down on a lot of cost. And since the footprint is smaller, unless the existing utilities are right up on the existing edge of pavement, a lot of times you can implement them without needing to move utilities, or it's minor adjustments to like service lines and such. Nathan just mentioned, you don't typically see the mini roundabout on high-speed facilities, although a city in Michigan has installed 6 or 7 on roads that have 55-mile-per-hour speed limits, and they've had really good success. What we see is more of the benefit is they will sort of act as a traffic calming device because you just can't go through them quickly. Whereas like, even if it's a 4-way stop, someone could not stop and go through there 80 miles an hour. It's going to be difficult to get through a roundabout at high speed. So it naturally forces people to slow down. But because they don't have to stop unless there's conflict inside of the roundabout, even though they slow down, overall, they're still getting through the intersection quickly. And so it's kind of you get some traffic calming, but you don't calm traffic so slow that you create congestion. I guess another benefit is, they can still, even though they're a mini size roundabout, they can still facilitate larger vehicles. The central island, what we're normally used to seeing on a regular roundabout, a larger roundabout, is kind of a raised island, and they do a truck apron, as they call it, on just the innermost part of that island. But the very center of the island is grass. But with the mini, essentially, the inside circle is basically so small that there's not room to put the grass. You just put that truck apron. So to a normal car, it looks like something that you want to avoid. So it forces you to go through in that sort of that S-curve motion. But when a larger truck goes through there, their trailer can easily mount that apron and just off track whatever it needs to do to get through the intersection. A lot of the ones we've seen in use in other states, they've had a lot of congestion issues along with some crashes. And so some of the intersections on this list, I don't think really had necessarily a congestion issue, but as I mentioned, they did rank kind of high for Hardin County from our intersection screenings. And so that's what the angle we look at it is. It's a very potentially good intersection option for helping reduce some of those excessive crashes. I guess one thing we wanted to put out there was that because our dollars are limited, we think some of these sites are good candidates, but it costs some money for us to hire a consultant to analyze them further and make sure that they're the right location. As I said, you want to put out of the box ideas or newer ideas, you want to make sure they're at the right spots and that they can be successful. And so we do have to do some study before we know for sure. Our goal is to hopefully get 2, maybe 3 that we could implement, but at the same time, we don't necessarily want to go down that path if the local officials were not interested. If you all know this is not for our city, then that's okay. We can respect that, but we wouldn't want to go through the trouble of doing all this analysis if you all were not interested at all. And so that's part of why we wanted to come and talk to you, was to kind of talk a little about this countermeasure idea and see what you all think. And not necessarily that I'm expecting you all to answer today, but get that out there that we are very interested in it. We would like to get a few built to sort of showcase their ability to function as an intersection control, but also just a demonstration too, so that if other cities become interested, we can say, well, hey, drive down to Elizabethtown. There's 2 or 3 of them down there. But yeah.
So these, this is a tactical question, but these are free, right?
Yes.
Right?
That is correct. Well, and so
Everybody's always willing to give you something, maybe it's on it later.
free. Right.
Where they getting it?
That's actually, I'm glad you brought it up, because that's another one Nathan should have, he didn't even remember to kick me to say, hey, don't forget. Yeah, I talk a lot. Anybody that's been around me knows I do talk a lot, but I probably talk in my sleep actually. But one of the great things about a roundabout is there's a small list of what we call countermeasures, or you all may call improvement types, that when funded through the HSIP, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, you're doing an HSIP project that's building one of those short-listed countermeasures, the feds pay 100% of the bill. Roundabouts is on that short list. And it's not, from our interpretation of the regulation, and it's not just the construction of the roundabout. If we did need to buy a temporary easement or a little bit of right-of-way, which again, we hope to not need to, but if we did any of those supplementary actions that go along with getting the roundabout in place, is also 100% reimbursable. And so, yes, essentially it would be 100% free.
Marty kind of brought up a decent point there about the maintenance. The fact that you've got some vehicles traversing over top of it is a continuous rebuild of the pavement on the
So
inside? or-
generally the central island is built out of concrete, and so you would, you only want about 4 inches higher than the asphalt elevation, but then you can inset whatever thickness you think that concrete needs to be. And so, like typically a lot of our pavements that we put out, like on the interstates and parkways that are concrete, we're 10 to 12 inches of thickness. So 8, 10, maybe 12 inches, that would likely be the design. That would be something we would ask our consultant firm to kind of gauge. And, they would take traffic projections and try to estimate, well, this many trucks, and so once it gets a pounding every day for 40 years or whatever, we would be able to kind of gauge how thick that concrete needs to be. But
Probably have to paint it, maintenance wise, you probably have to paint.
yeah, there would be some striping, although I don't know that it would be, it wouldn't be super extensive, but a lot of the way the approaches are, you would want to do some striping, and some of that striping would just be short term. There's you all may have seen them, we haven't done it much in Kentucky, and I don't know that we've done it in this area, but a countermeasure that we've tried out is what they call optical speed bars. And when someone's approaching something like a curve or an intersection or whatever it is, where you want to try to subconsciously make them think, hey, I should slow down, you just put these little tick marks on the edges of the stripes.
We've actually done
You've
that.
Yeah. And so what we found in some of our studies is those work really well for that first year. Then once everybody kind of gets used to them, they just ignore them. But with the roundabout, you've got that sort of imposing central island that gives you that feeling that, oh, I need to slow down. The cautious part is that transition between, well, that used to never be there and now it is. And so a lot of times those optical speed bars are used for that first year to remind people like, hey, things are a little different, slow down. And then as those wear off on the subconscious, well, by then everybody's got used to the fact that we have a new intersection. And so that's the state we've probably talked to the most has been Michigan, and that's how they lay theirs out. But Nathan is right. The central island, you would want a little bit of striping around it, and then on the approaches, they have what's called a splitter island, which also helps to remind people, hey, you're entering this intersection, slow down. And usually you would want to stripe around those to help delineate those. But I guess in one way you could maybe argue that you have a little bit less asphalt to maintain. Maybe that offsets the small cost of the striping over time. We would obviously, with our project, put out thermoplastic striping, so that hopefully you'll get a good 5, 6, 7 years, maybe longer, before you would even have to deal with it. Which I don't know if you all do a lot of striping on any of your roads or not, maybe a few, but.
I think if we could ease the flow of traffic and provide greater safety, my guess is this council would say we're all for it.
Yeah,
And we probably.
it's hard to argue against safety, right?
Well, there's, these pictures that you put in here, did you rank them, or did you just put them in there?
I just put them, I put them in there kind of in order. Nathan has sent me the rankings.
You probably remember better than me.
So,
I think number one was,
Number one, I think, was Poplar.
Main and
Crutcher.
Poplar?
Or Main and Crutcher.
are you all using,
Oh, maybe.
were you all using statistics or something to come up with those locations, or are there others that if we brought up that you would consider, or are you? setting
Yeah,
some
we'll
of these?
we'll consider anything. Like, so every intersection is analyzed. It gets really geeked out, so I'll try to be short and simple, but there's 2 main things that drive crash performance, or what you would expect to see, and that is the number of historical crashes for a given facility type, and then there's traffic volume. And so we look at traffic volume as being considered as exposure. So if you expose something to something else enough times, you will get an outcome. Sometimes that outcome's bad, sometimes it's good, but a lot of models can be driven by exposure. So after so much exposure, you'll have X events. And so
but they're still.
we develop these models based on actual historical crash records. So we know, well, this kind of intersection on average has this many crashes if it has this traffic volume. So then that gives us the framework of this model. Then we can go to every single intersection in the state and say, well, for that intersection type, and here's the model, we should be seeing this many. And then it's simply, well, either we're having that many or less, or we're having that many or more, and what's that magnitude? And so several of these, well, let me back up. So we do that process, we do it for all crashes, so regardless of severity, whether it's just a fender bender all the way to a fatality, but then we also run that analysis where we only look at the severe crashes, so the injury and fatal collisions, which there are 3 different kinds of injury. There's the very serious injuries, kind of a moderate injury, and then what we call a possible injury. So, that might be where someone has a rear end and they complain that their neck's hurting, but the officer's like, well, I don't see an injury, but maybe. And so we look at those moderate, severe, and fatal. We analyze just that too. And so some of these intersections didn't have a lot of crashes, but they had several injury crashes, several more than expected. There was a few that had kind of several more injury and just a lot of fender benders. And so, that saves the public some money too, but the injuries are what typically save the most money to the average taxpayer. So
I have the rankings and I'll forward that to you.
So Don or Jamie or Michael or Mark, any of y'all have any concerns or questions? That's kind of your all's area of expertise.
The only question that I've got is, have you considered a single axle, 40-foot ladder truck to get around that?
we haven't ran that template. They call it auto turn as a software, but it's a turning template. That would be something we would definitely evaluate to make sure that we're not creating an issue. One of the things that we did have read as a drawback is the mini roundabout compared to the regular size, or what you were used to seeing, is that a U-turn movement can be a little difficult in larger vehicles. So if you had an intersection where, like, well, hey, we have to turn around there, that would be good info to know, so that, because at that point, that mini roundabout may not work for that. But if you're going through a mini roundabout and you're making a left, a through, or a right, they are designed to accommodate. Like, we've got videos of the ones in Michigan. It's called a WB62. It's kind of the normal tractor trailer you can see on the road. They negotiate through there just fine. Again, the trailer has to mount over that concrete center island, but where their tires are so big, mounting a 4-inch concrete curbs like a cakewalk.
Is there one anywhere that, I think the easiest way for us to decide is if we had a video of cars going around one of these mini ones.
Kind of like the one in Ronnieville?
Yep, that's a big one, isn't it?
Well, it's on the larger, yeah. It would not classify as a compact or a mini, but
The closest one for us is here in town. Langley and Hickory is
That's
a little bit bigger than the mini roundabout, what they're talking
So that
about.
one out there is a little bigger, larger.
yeah, it's not much.
But it doesn't have a mountable median.
Yeah,
And school buses go through there. I'm sure your fire trucks have been through there.
Yeah.
Garbage trucks go through there. Traffic goes through there. They're all down.
That one brings up a good point because, as you look at these, that one on Langley here is pretty because there is plantings and stuff in the middle of that. Otherwise, these are concrete things that gets rocks and dirt. And while we try to keep the city clean, during wintertime, you drive on the bypass and see how nasty that looks sometimes. And that's not us.
Yeah.
Just so you know that's your fault.
Yeah,
But,
that's us.
do these allow where you could do, going back to my last spruce updates, some landscaping, some adoptive spots? Areas
Possibly, one of the issues is
the truck running over.
yeah, and so you have to grow them a little bit. We could look at that. I just don't know for sure that we could,
And you just
because some of these, you
paint it
just,
green,
you can do that. Now, some of
like
the,
grass.
Washington State has built that central island on some of theirs out of modular units, so like a really hard rubberized plastic. I think they did that just for speed of deployment, because
I'm just thinking that it would look better.
Yeah.
We try to make the city look
We
good.
can landscape those and get the state to pay for that too, that'd be.
Well, the initial would be part of it, I think.
well, possibly,
It's
if
make
it fit. That, the worry I have is to make that apron big enough to where you have some kind of
Yeah.
space in the middle, that everything's just gotta go out this way to create that space.
But if that one on Langley Trace is just a little bit bigger, it seemed like you would be able.
And then, that's what I say, it might be very
I
possible.
don't
This
know how many
depends.
semis are using that though.
Yeah.
Tractor
No,
trailers.
I never seen it,
So-
but I'm sure.
But
Fire
I've
trucks
seen
get-
fire trucks.
Yes.
Look at the spots that you guys have chosen. We have other issues much bigger than these spots, such as Lakewood Drive. And when I say issues, I'm talking speeding, cut-throughs, that what you're talking about would slow traffic down for us greatly. Deeks Drive, but just areas that I know that over years, people have complained over and over again.
Yeah.
So instead of putting something at North Mantle and Poplar, I've never had a complaint. I've never heard it in that area. I've never even seen a traffic collision. I'm sure it's happened, but Lakewood Drive, where we get multitudes of calls because of people cutting through, not stopping at stop signs, things like that. Could we use something like this in an area like that?
The answer is yes. Our program requires us to expend funds through a data-driven process based on crash analysis. So I don't know if yes, you can implement a mini roundabout there most likely. I mean, it would need to be studied too. For us to I guess, fund that solution, it would have to rank in the upper intersection list. So we get this a lot from our own internal folks throughout the districts. They will call and say, hey, we get a lot of complaints about this location. Where does it rank compared to some of this other? Can we use HSIP funds? And unfortunately, it seems like the places where people complain is a lot of near misses or near crashes. Sure. And it's like everybody's learned, well, you better be careful there because you got 10 people that don't know how to drive that area. And so you have all these complaints, but no actual events, or very few. And so they tend to not rank very high, which I know can be frustrating, but what I try to remind people is until we get rid of the ones that are actually performing bad, we can't really move on to the ones that perform poorly but just haven't had a lot of events. You know, it's kind of a ranking thing, a priority thing. And so, but now from just an actual implementation and would it help? I would think, based on what you've told me, I would say yes. It's just a matter of how do you pay for it? That's the problem is it's federally required that we have a data-driven process to expend our funds. And so,
So some of the discussion was that there's data that we can use to obtain this. They provide most of the cost to assess that, test bed, if you will, and we can look at areas like Lakewood Drive and some other areas where we have the issues that you're talking about. A little bit later on down the road, we can get this one.
yeah, and that's the other thing too. Historically, the Highway Safety Improvement Program has not expended very many funds on locally owned streets. When we've analyzed the entire statewide crash data, there's about 80,000 miles of road in Kentucky. KYTC owns about 28,000 of those miles, and the rest are owned by local agencies. And over the past, about 15% of our fatal collisions have occurred on that 56,000 miles owned by locals, and about 85% of the fatal collisions have occurred on our 28,000. And so from looking at we own a small percentage and have the vast majority, we have used that data to support spending a lot of the funds on our roads. But we also recognize that, I try to liken our program to financial investing. It's good to diversify. And so this is one of our attempts to start looking at, well, how can we give a little piece of the pie to some of the local agencies and do it through data, but also demonstrate that these solutions are viable and possibly solve other problems that may not really be straight up safety, but and we feel like that even though it's like, well, yeah, maybe the bulk of the problems on our network, it's still good to spend money in different ways to, if we can do this and it helps you guys advance these, not just roundabout, alternative intersections and other spots, in the bigger picture, we've won, or we're winning more than if we just keep narrow focused. It's the federal regs that they attach to the HSIP does tie our hands a little bit. And so we do try our best to follow the intent of the regulation, and we work very closely with the safety engineer at the FHWA. His office is just a couple streets down from ours in Frankfurt. And so I think he's very excited to see how we can branch out to local agencies and see what we can accomplish. But sort of what I'm saying too is over time, you guys are going to have more competition too. I mean, we're kind of just coming to you guys first because we've had a lot of good working relationships with Scott.
Well, I know I'm happy to see that you have Langman Lane, Hill Street, and Woodland Drive, because I know when that project was underway, that we talked about it right out there. That's 2 years ago,
Yeah,
so.
I think that one was on Scott's list originally, and then
Yes,
it ranks probably, was it 6? It ranks 6.
Six?
Yeah.
Which
But
that's
Ben,
six.
But you
Six
guys
out
are,
of-
that's a new road.
Hill Street's a new intersection there,
Right.
so again, it's data driven.
Yep.
So you're not gonna,
Which that could be one of those where the Hill Street, that changes the intersection type. It's no longer a 3-leg approach, it's 4. And the models may expect more, because that's more people coming through the intersection. So what I'm getting at is the time to strike may be now, because 2 years from now, when we run the analysis, that improvement may reduce crashes, even if it's not a lot, and it could fall in ranking too. Or it could go the other way. I mean, you never know.
But first off, we greatly appreciate being a pilot program, or whatever you want to call us per se. Second of all, if you all can assure Councilman Fulkerson that they'll stay somewhat clean, I think we're all in favor of moving forward.
I asked for whiskey barrels with plantings in them.
On a serious note, we're very interested in moving forward and
Okay, yeah.
participating with you all and doing whatever we need to do on.
Like I said, our goal is to study several of these locations and like, if I could snap my fingers, I'd be letting a contract tomorrow to build 3. I would really love to get here's my vision is I would like to get the one at Main and Poplar and Main and Crutcher, if it works. Again, we got to study this, but to have 2 that are relatively close, because then that kind of shows they can work well together.
What about
And then
Main
have one
What
that's,
about Main and Sycamore and Main and
that would be another
Poplar and
tandem.
Sycamore.
Yeah.
Poplar and Sycamore?
And Mantle.
Dolphin.
Those rank,
Was there real close together?
Dolphin, Joe Sale.
but they rank,
Yeah,
they rank.
that's true. Yeah, Poplar and Sycamore, that one may work. But that's kind of why I like to get 3. It's kind of 1 just by itself. It works.
Hey,
2
how
close
about
together, it works. It kind of shows both dynamics.
the one at Langman and Woodland and Hill Street's a good spot too, in my opinion.
Yeah. And if we end up,
We'll take 10.
yeah, if we end up, it work for more, but that was kind of mine. It's like, man, if we could just get 3, couple
Sure.
as a pair and 1 off by itself, it would just be a good demonstration. And
Just let us know what we need to do moving forward. What is the next step?
well, so we have consultants that we have on what we call an on-call contract. And so when we identify a project, an HSIP project through the data, we look at who's the next consultant on the list to be assigned a project. We talk with the feds, get some design funding authorized, and then we assign them that contract and tell them the scope of work we want done. And sometimes that scope of work changes. We'll get months into it and we're like, oh, but we need to add this to the work. But the next step is to request some design funding for the project, and when that's authorized, assign it to one of our consulting firms, and we'll have a kickoff meeting and kind of get them going on what we need them to do. And then they will start that process. And at some point, they'll have enough information to come to a project team and say, hey, this is what we found, this is what we think, what do you all think? Make some decisions and then move further into detailed design to then let it to contract. Typically, our HSIP projects, They can range anywhere from about 8 months to 15 months for that design process. I'm hoping these will be on the quicker side because, you know, every day you don't implement something's a missed opportunity. So that would be our next step, is to get the design money and a consultant on board. The kind of the, I guess, good thing is we have a particular consultant in mind. And as I said, we're supposed to go in order. Well, we just renewed our contract, and they actually were the lucky first name out of the hat, so they're the first assigned. So I would like to get all this set up so that when our contract's finalized, it'll take about another month, which is about how long it'll take to get the design funds. So I can make that their first assignment with this renewed contract.
Y'all just coordinate with Scott?
Yep. And, you know, if you guys want us to come and show you at some milestone, kind of give you some.
We would actually.
Yeah. And like I said, our big things, we didn't want to start that whole process and then you guys go, whoa, we're not interested at all. And then it's like, crap, we wasted all that design money.
We appreciate you coming and pitching to us and giving us the first opportunity.
Well, we've had some real, you know, I don't know how familiar you all are with our J-Turn project on 31W, but we've had some really good successes in this area at all levels of government. So when Scott approached Nathan, and I was like, well, heck yeah, that's another good reason for us to be doing something in Hardin County. Right?
That'd be great.
Well, and so.
You like those better in county government?
Yeah. We like all of our counties.
Yeah. Good results with all levels here in Elizabethtown area and the Hardin County. Yeah, so we really appreciate your all's time. We've been very excited. It's just been, we want that first 2 or 3 to be just winners, and sometimes it's hard to get all those pieces to come together.
I have one last question. I got to know, because I'm a retired state trooper. I got to know where in Eastern Kentucky you're from.
I'm from Rockcastle County.
Rock, Mount Vernon.
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
Not that I can tell or anything.
No. Some people can, but not everyone.
Appreciate it,
All
guys.
right, thank you all.
Okay. This is Jana Clark from Tourism, Alcohol Use Policy at the Sports Park. So Wildcat Blue one.
No, just for you. Do you all have a copy of this? If not, I have extra ones.
Yes.
Thank you. I am here today to ask for, to bring up an issue that we first discussed last spring during the joint budget session that relates to alcohol policies for city facilities and parks. When we first talked about this last spring, of course, we ended up deciding that it was a little premature because we would be at this place this year with the new administration and decided it would be better to address it here. And the idea originated out of our transition team and then of course discussed with Tourism's Commission and the City Council at the time, given the new operation agreement that we're getting ready to go into as far as the sports park is concerned. And as you know, from the current city alcohol policy, the Elizabethtown Sports Park is listed as one of the facilities where alcohol is not allowed for any reason. And our request is to have the same verbiage, and I've drafted it. I just used what was here for Freeman Lake. Again, the verbiage is not as important to us as the purpose. And the request that we're making is to add the Elizabethtown Sports Park so that alcohol, distilled spirits, wine, and or malt-based beverages may be allowed to be served or sold at the Elizabethtown Sports Park for non-youth events, provided all ABC licenses are obtained and city state laws are followed. Of course, the idea being that moving forward after the 1st of July, there would be the opportunity to hold adult sporting events, community events, corporate events, those types of things. The decisions on who gets the license, what type of license, whether it is sold or just poured or sampled, would still need to be addressed under the applicable laws for what they're wanting to do. But the first step in that is to ask for the exception be noted for the Elizabethtown Sports Park in the current policy. And I'm happy to answer any questions or specifics. I think we've talked about this several times. But I'm happy to answer any questions as it pertains to our request.
gist of it is to allow you to have a private event or a privately sponsored event that you sell tickets to, you know, or whatever. Just like you
Well-
did Freeman Lake.
Well, that the sports park would do, or that another sponsor would do, or that another entity that rented the facility would do. I mean, so the first step is to gain the exemption, so that when those plans are put in place for adult-only events, we can then evaluate who would need to sponsor it, who would need to get the license, and that would be something that would need to be approved through our state law office as well as our city agency office.
This is obviously something that SFM has done at other parks.
It is, and it's one of the first questions they asked us. We did, as we talked about kind of last spring before we even entered into the RFQ process, talked about the possibility of this, and it was met with favorable notions at the time that for non-youth oriented events, that it would be an acceptable practice given everything else was followed.
I don't have a problem.
I don't have a problem. We let the gate open at the lake.
The door is open.
I think to me, the non-youth. is what's-
Absolutely.
It's
And that was
very-
SFM's suggestion as well, by the way, just so you know.
Excuse me.
That was their suggestion as well, to just make it all non-youth events. That way there's never a question.
It's basically just trying to find another venue for the facility.
Absolutely,
Help make it financially feasible.
absolutely. Any other questions for me? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you, Jack.
Stormwater Director Robert Bush to talk to us about tractor purchase.
Thank you all. I'll be brief. February 14th, we received bids from 3 local vendors for a tractor and mower combination and loader. Received, as I said, we ended up receiving 3 bids, and we're at this point in time asking we've recommended purchase from Outdoor Power Source for Kubota tractor at $74,400. This was incorporated in our budget this year. That price is under budget. This piece of equipment will assist us in our mission of trying to manage particularly our dam areas and those areas that are difficult to mow. What we have now is a dedicated slope mower that we're using in those applications. This will augment that mower and letting us address some of the lower lying areas while that mower is doing what it's supposed to do on the heavily sloped areas. But it's just another tool for us to achieve our goals. We're mowing a lot of grass, and we have a few dedicated pieces of equipment right now. We have, a residential zero-turn mower. We have a track loader, mini track loader mounted bush hog that will be used also. So it'll just be another tool in our arsenal to address these issues.
How many hours are you using that slope mower?
A lot. It's
What's that mean though?
Well, I don't know how many hours, Marty, I haven't seen an hour total on it lately, but it gets some heavy use, it really does. It's much more than we even anticipated with the initial purchase. So it is a good machine. It takes a lot of maintenance to keep it rolling, but the way we use it particularly. So this will lighten the load on it a little bit and help us extend the life on it. I apologize for not having those direct numbers on how many hours is on that machine.
So this mower that you're looking to purchase will replace that slope mower in those lower areas?
Yeah, it'll just augment what we're doing
What you're
there.
using
So,
now to mow those areas?
so we can push up on the slopes with this piece of equipment you know, cut our mowing time down quite a bit.
But you'll still use both of them, keep them both in the arsenal, so to speak.
Yes, they'll both be in the arsenal, so to speak, yes. You know, of course, that slow mower will get to a phase out in it sometime in the future, but I have to just see, you know, how it continues on for us.
But then that phase out, that went cheap.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of, it's pretty costly item, so we'll sell it. We'll see, but we'll cross that bridge, I guess, when we get there. Any other questions?
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you all very much.
March 4th meeting items.
Just, we gave you all some information. The mayor's got some appointments. We're following up with, Bush Lane project that Michael talked to you all about a couple weeks ago. So we'll probably have that contract for you. We'll have Robert's, bid, information. We'll prepare the change to the policy and present that to you all too. If you all have any other, items you all want us to add, let us know this week, but if not, I'm trying to just stay up on the stuff we've gone over the last couple of weeks with you guys.
Mark. Something, Mark.
Not yet.
Okay, that we're adjourned. Appreciate everybody coming.
Now.